The Boy Who Cried Lunch Monitor. Mrs. Buns ruled Aesop Elementary's lunchroom with an iron fist. No kid dared blow bubbles in his milk or slurp her spaghetti or stick a straw up his nose. If one of them did, lunchroom infraction! Mrs. Buns would bellow through her bullhorn. 5 minutes on the wall. On the wall. Those 3 words struck fear into the heart of every student at Aesop Elementary, first graders and fifth graders alike. On the wall. It was Mrs. Buns's favorite punishment, a form of torture so horrible that anyone who endured it never again left his bread crusts uneaten or chewed with her mouth open. Still, at the beginning of every school year, there was always one kid foolish enough to tangle with Big Bad Buns. You know what I'm having for lunch? That kid might holler. And before anyone could warn her, she would open her mouth wide so all could see the glob of half-chewed bologna with mustard and pickle relish on pumpernickel lurking inside, and she would squeal, "Seafood!" The lunch monitor's vengeance was swift. "Lunchroom infraction!" Mrs. Buns would bellow. 5 minutes on the wall! The other students would shudder. Mrs. Buns made the kid face the room with her back to the cold tiled wall. "I think you have something to say to your schoolmates," she would growl. "Huh?" The kid always looked bewildered. "An apology," Mrs. Buns would continue. "You owe us all an apology." No one could bear to watch. 100 elementary school students would quickly look down at their carrot sticks or stare at their orange slices. I, 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 I don't understand. The kid was always red-faced and stammering by this time. Waves of humiliation were washing over her. She was drowning in them. That was when Mrs. Buns would pull the note card from her pocket. Yellowed with age and wrinkled from use, it had through the years been held in the quaking hands of dozens of students. Now it was this kid's turn. "Read it," Mrs. Buns would say. The kid recognized defeat. In a small, quavering voice, so unlike the voice that only moments earlier had shouted, "Seafood!" she read, "I apologize for my rudeness and promise to use my best table manners the next time I sit down to lunch." "Thank you," Mrs. Buns would say. Then she'd walk away, leaving the kid to simmer in her own embarrassment for 5 long minutes on the wall. No wonder the children in Aesop Elementary's lunchroom sat up straight, ate in silence, and cleaned up all their trash. "But," asked Mr. Jupiter one day as he bit into the cook's liverwurst and cranberry sauce sandwich, "are the children happy? Do they enjoy lunchtime?" "Lunchtime isn't about enjoyment," Mrs. Buns replied. "It's about discipline and maintaining order." At that moment, Mrs. Struggles raced into the lunchroom. "Bertha, come quick," she panted. "There's a traffic jam in the kindergarten drop-off lane. I need you and your bullhorn to untangle it." "I'm on my way," cried Mrs. Buns, and she rushed from the lunchroom. Mr. Jupiter followed. Left unmonitored, the students sat in silence for a moment. Then Rose cautiously leaned over and whispered in Missy's ear. Emberly quietly offered Ham a chocolate chip cookie. Lenny glanced furtively around the lunchroom, and then he took a big swig of his Mr. Fizz and the doors of restraint were belched wide open. Jackie wildly pitched cheesy puffs into Calvin's open mouth. Ashley A and Ashley B and Ashley Z put their mashed potatoes together and built a snowman. Amisha gargled with chocolate milk. The only fourth grader not laughing or talking or joining in the fun was Melvin Moody. Melvin was used to not joining in. He was used to not being a part of the group. Somehow, in Mr. Jupiter's class, Melvin always managed to blurt out the wrong thing, or pick his nose when someone was looking, or fumble the ball at recess and lose the championship kickball game. This kind of behavior tended to keep the other kids away. Now Melvin was suddenly seized with an uncontrollable urge. Leaping to his feet, he cupped his hands around his mouth and cried, "Lunch monitor! Lunch monitor!" Fear swept through the room. Pretzels were yanked from nostrils. Bread crusts were swallowed whole. The entire student body smoothed their hair and sat up straight and hoped their cheeks weren't too flushed with joy. A minute passed, then another, and another. "She's not coming," Victoria finally said. Lenny whirled on Melvin. "You did it," he shouted. "You ruined the fun." All eyes turned to Melvin. Jackie booed. Rachel and Lil stuck out their tongues. Bruce threw a banana peel. It hit Melvin in the back of the head, and Melvin loved it. "I'm the center of attention," he thought, and he held his chin high. For days afterward, Melvin felt like a celebrity. "There's that kid from the lunchroom," whispered Bernadette. "What a loser," whispered Ham. "What's his name again?" asked Lil. The others shrugged. All too soon, however, Melvin's celebrity faded. By week's end, he was a nobody again. That was when Miss Turner wobbled into the lunchroom. Instead of her sensible, shushing shoes, she was wearing a very spiky, very strappy, very purple pair of high-heeled sandals. "Bertha," said Miss Turner, swaying slightly, "you've got a phone call in the office." "I'm busy," grumbled Miss Buns. Eyes narrowed, she plucked a recyclable can from the regular trash, then looked around for the rule breaker. "But it's your mother, the Marine," said Mrs. Turner. She grabbed the edge of a nearby table to steady herself. "She's calling from boot camp." Mrs. Buns hesitated, then dropped the can into the recycling bin and headed to the office. At that moment, Miss Turner spied Mr. Jupiter giving the cook a recipe for yak and cheese, a delicacy among the nomads of the Gobi Desert, he said. She took a wobbly step toward him and, "Oops," said Mr. Jupiter. He caught the librarian before she hit the floor. "One must be careful when wearing such lofty shoes." Miss Turner melted into his arms. "Oh, dear me," she sighed weakly. "I think I've twisted my ankle." "Allow me to help you back to the library," offered Mr. Jupiter, and they limped away, leaving the lunchroom unmonitored. Within seconds, first graders crawled under tables. Second graders squeezed the cream filling out of their cupcakes. Third graders blew bits of fruit cocktail from their straws. As for the fourth graders, they raced their sandwich cookies down the length of the table. "And Oreo takes the lead," said Jackie in her sport announcer voice, followed by Hydrox and Girl Scout. Then, "Lunch monitor! Lunch monitor! Lunch monitor!" Melvin cried. Quick as a wink, straws were stuck back into milk cartons. Sandwich cookies were popped into mouths. Flushed and panting, everyone braced themselves for nothing. "Not again," moaned Calvin. He whirled on Melvin. "What's your problem, kid?" But Melvin didn't have a problem, because once again, in the days that followed, he was talked about, recognized, somebody. Fame was fleeting. By the middle of the following week, Melvin was as forgotten as last month's vocabulary words. That was when, during lunch, crash! "Ah! Mayday!" cried Miss Shorthand, who had been standing on a swivel chair and hanging a sign in the hallway. "Mayday!" Miss Buns rushed to help her. Left alone in the lunchroom, the students didn't waste a second. Everyone laughed or joked or blew milk out of their nose. At the fourth grade table, Jackie had invented a game called Flick Your Pea, and everyone was playing. Everyone, that is, except Melvin. Then he saw her, Mrs. Buns, coming down the hallway, closer and closer. "Lunch monitor! Lunch monitor! Lunch monitor!" he cried. "Yeah, right," drawled Lenny. He flicked a pea into Missy's applesauce. Miss Buns reached the door. Melvin hopped up and down. He waved his arms. He cried even more loudly, "Lunch monitor! Lunch monitor! Lunch monitor!" "Knock it off, kid," said Calvin. "Nobody believes you." And he aimed a pea at Stanford. Miss Buns pushed on the wide swinging doors. Panicked and desperate, Melvin leaped onto the fourth grade table. He hopped up and down and he waved his arms and cried at the top of his voice, Lunch monitor! Lunch monitor! His behavior finally grabbed their attention. Everyone stopped joking and laughing and flicking peas. They turned to look at Melvin just as Mrs. Buns burst into the lunchroom. Lunchroom infraction! She bellowed through her bullhorn. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of Melvin, who was still hopping, waving, and shouting on top of the table. Unbelievable! She said. I'm gone with for just a few moments, and look how you behave. Melvin Moody, that's 5 minutes on the wall. So, the moral of this chapter is liars are not believed even when they tell the truth.